Hi, everyone. Great to have you with us live from lockdown tonight for this very, very special Facebook Live where we're joined by Felicity. Hi, Felicity. How are you going? Who's the director of the Young Workers Centre, a fantastic one-stop shop in Melbourne that's looking after the rights of young workers and making sure, especially at this time, that people are protected. And Bella, who's from Young Campaigns. Hi, Bella. How you going?
Hi, everyone. Hi, Adam. Hey, Felicity.
Yeah. And that you can tell us a bit more in a moment, but Young Campaigns are campaigning for economic justice for young people in a grassroots organisation that at the moment has probably got their work cut out for them as well. I want to acknowledge to you all that I'm coming here from Wurundjeri land, and probably if you're in this country we call from Australia, you're probably sitting on something that always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and want to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to any Indigenous Australians who are joining us tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, because we're here to talk about something that is pretty important, and especially important at the moment in the context of being hit by coronavirus and the economic consequences of that and the social consequences of that, as whole industries have been locked down and lots of people have been chucked out of work or put under pressure that's bigger than the pressure was before. And we're here to talk about specifically the impact of that on young people. And also the government's response, and the fact that the government has, to a great extent, and I think probably deliberately, left a lot of young people behind and has just said, oh, well, we don't care about you, you can fend for yourselves. And we want to unpack that a bit tonight and talk a bit about what's happening, talk a bit about some of the stories that we've been hearing about the impacts on young people, and also talk about what we might do, what the future looks like, and then how we can fight to change it. But I think, going into this crisis, Felicity and Bella, I mean, there was nearly 1 in 3 young people in this country before the corona crisis hit either didn't have a job or didn't have enough hours of work. And a lot of the jobs that young people had insecure, so not very well paid and very insecure, where people don't know, didn't necessarily have a lot of rights in those jobs, and people are sort of taking what they could get. And it wasn't a very flash situation before the crisis hit, was it?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Young workers prior to COVID-19 were already really vulnerable. And I guess, that's exactly why the Young Workers Centre exists, because we know that so many young workers were either getting exploited at work or in, insecure, not ideal work situations. And like you said, young workers are increasingly in insecure, casualised work. About 50% of young workers are in casual work, which means that they don't have access to things like sick leave or annual leave or redundancy pay if things, don't go so well as we're, experiencing right now. So, yeah, they were already really vulnerable and often in low-wage industries too. But you mentioned, they were often living paycheck to paycheck already whilst juggling studies or, other responsibilities. And, these were already workers who were often working weekends, relying on penalty rates, and have, as we've seen over the last few years, had those cut too by this federal government. So, yeah, they were already doing it pretty tough.
And what about you, Bella? What were you working on before this hit?
Yeah, I guess Young is an organisation that already aims to address the economic injustices that particular young people as a generation face, that we're the first generation in a long time that is less well off than our parents. But I think COVID has sort of hit the sweet spot for young people, that it's made both their work and their housing insecure, because obviously they're really linked. And so, just like Felicity said, young people are already exploited at work so much more on a generational level. And for a lot of marginalised communities, we don't have savings, we don't have a lot of things built up, we're not prepared for a crisis like this. And most of the government measures aim to address people who, for the most part, are in secure industries, who perhaps own a house or have built up their super. And a lot of the sort of relief measures just really are leaving young people behind, and are leaving them to sort of rely on informal negotiations with either their property agent or their landlord or their boss to actually try and solve structural inequalities that have been going on for so much longer than just the COVID crisis.
And Bella, what are some of the stories that you've been hearing, and Felicity, you too, about what's been happening to people, young people at work since the crisis has hit?
I don't know about you, Felicity, but overwhelmingly it's been two things. The first is people just not being able to understand how to get on the JobKeeper scheme. Either their boss telling them that because they're casual workers and because they're young people that they're going to be the first people to be stood down and they won't be re-included on the JobKeeper scheme even though the government is subsidising it. Or it's stories of people who are international students and migrants who unfortunately don't qualify for any type of government support. So you've got the increase to New Start or JobSeeker now, which is, so needed, but it leaves out almost 1 million workers across Australia. So we're finding people who are, asking us or just friends of mine saying, well, which one do I apply for? What support can I get? And unfortunately, the answer is more often than not actually nothing, or you might have to ask your boss if they can make an exception.
Same for you?
So every day young workers are contacting us about either being stood down and being made redundant, I guess simply not having either any hours or any shifts or not enough to put food on the table or a roof over their heads. And we obviously really welcome the JobKeeper wage subsidy announcement that the government made a couple of weeks ago now. That was because workers, including young workers, came together and campaigned for that, and a big pat on the back to those workers who did campaign and force the government to make that announcement. It shows the power of young workers coming together and demanding something. But yeah, like Bella said, it's certainly not perfect and doesn't go far enough. Casuals who haven't worked for the same employer for 12 months are excluded, and we know so many of those are young workers, and they're disproportionately represented in those in that group of casual workers who are left behind by the government. I think there's about 1 million casuals who are excluded, and we know that young workers are in industries like retail and hospitality where the turnover is about 60% each year. So obviously, it is overwhelmingly young workers who are impacted, and then you've got workers in, young workers in, for instance, higher education who are maybe doing their PhD at the same time or as working, and they never even get often a 12-month contract in the first place. And so many different industries are impacted when it comes to casuals.
Aaron just made a comment on the page as well, making the point that PhD students and universities are largely just excluded from it as well. And Vicky, let us know it's not just happening in hospitality and retail, though that's an area where a lot of people are being impacted. She's been saying that she's being impacted in a job as an accountant. This is kind of right across the board, isn't it? And I think it's just worth unpacking a bit what you said there about the JobKeeper scheme. It's a scheme where the government is giving money to employers that's then meant to be passed on to workers. But it's from what you're saying, this is what we've heard as well. It's a big thing that we managed to get it, but there's a couple of problems with it. One is it doesn't require the employers; they're not obliged to keep people on. So even if you were kept on, it's kind of up to them as to whether they're going to keep people on or not. And I think certainly a lot of the stories that we've been hearing have been people saying, well, my boss doesn't want to keep me on. What should I do? And do they have to keep me on? And I guess the second point that you're alluding to, just to clarify for people, is that there's, for example, casuals, if you've been employed for less than 12 months or you're a casual but you weren't employed on the magic date that the scheme started, then it doesn't apply to you at all. And of those 1.1 million casuals, half of them are young people. So it's there's a lot of people that are being left out from the government's response.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely agree that, all casuals should be included in the scheme. I don't think it's fair that one worker who's been employed somewhere for 11 months who does the same job stood next to somebody who's been employed for 13 months is, left not being eligible for the JobKeeper wage subsidy. But, there's definitely some loopholes in there which, some bosses are exploiting or being, in an obstacle in the way in between a worker having access to that $1,500 per fortnight or not. And we've definitely over the last couple of weeks been hearing lots of those stories where either employers are refusing to sign up for the scheme or trying to keep part of the money themselves and so on. So yeah, we've actually launched JobScammer.com, which is a website where people can share those stories.
Can you say that again? What's that website?
It's a bit of a play on words, JobScammer.com, where you can share those stories and we can try and assist you to empower you to deal with those problems that you're coming across.
Yeah.
That's great. And I think just to add what to Felicity said, I think, fundamentally JobKeeper doesn't fix the exploitation that young people face with their normal working conditions. So if young people are having their wages stolen, their super stolen by their boss, JobKeeper fundamentally gives the same power to the employers to decide what workers get. And I think one of the things that isn't really coming up as much when we're talking about JobKeeper is that one of the reasons that young people are sort of disproportionately affected by it and by the decision of employers to sort of do whatever they want is that a lot of young people, like, we're not in meaningful work. We're not in work that is related to our field. We're in work that this crisis has really proven doesn't really need to exist. It's often not essential work. And so we're the first people to be stood down. Maybe there isn't work for us. And so it's kind of really pointing to a bigger thing that has existed for, a lot longer than just this March onwards. That is that a lot of young people are struggling to find jobs where they actually can be involved in their community doing meaningful work that, provides a benefit to the people around them. And so it's a chance for us and, a worry to think about, how we actually get into work that we have control over and that contributes to the world around us.
And then I want to ask you, Felicity, in a moment about what you think this is going to mean for people's future, like this period of now sort of being smashed, we don't quite know how long it's going to last for, but it lasts for 6 months, it lasts for a year. It could actually have sort of ongoing impacts. But it's Bella, one of the things you just mentioned before, talking about power imbalances, and one of the things that you mentioned at the start that is something we've heard a lot from people is, of course, young people are going to be more likely to be renting. And so if you're more likely to be renting and you're more likely to be in those sectors that lose jobs, and then those sectors aren't covered by the government's JobKeeper package, that puts you under stress, like not just to be able to get food and buy the essentials, but to just have a roof over your head as well. And that, like, when you compound all of those things together, like rent in particular and housing, must be, certainly from what we're hearing, is something that's really causing a lot of young people a lot of stress at the moment. I mean, it was before, and now all of this has made it a lot worse.
Totally, yeah. Like, for the majority of young people, most of your income goes on rent. Most of my income goes on rent. And Young Campaigns at the moment is trying to respond to the fact that although sort of anti-eviction legislation was announced state by state, it's really not fit for purpose because it relies on young people having the savings and somehow the nous to negotiate with their landlord a rent reduction that might also just compile into one big debt at the end of the crisis. So
yeah, but Scott Morrison said it's all right that renters and landlords can sit down around a table and show a bit of common sense and work it all out, right? It's all going to be okay.
We've had some pretty funny story of people trying to negotiate with their landlords and getting a pretty firm answer back. So I think, Scott Morrison might need to try renting a place and seeing what his landlord says to get a sense of the reality of it. Because for most young people, they're incredibly worried about being evicted. It's also putting a lot of pressure on personal relationships with share houses. If you're living with an essential worker, if you're living with people who've lost income, it becomes such a stressful environment in an already stressful situation. And to have that looming debt hanging over your head is just really the last thing that we need.
And so, Felicity, I might be interested to hear from you in a moment about what you think now this is going to mean, like, given we're seeing pretty high unemployment figures being projected, like we said at the start, was already kind of at crisis levels before, but now is projected to get a lot worse. But one of the things that Charlie has said to us is that she's heard the number of people who've just been sacked by their bosses instead of the bosses making any attempt to keep them on JobKeeper is, like, yes, there's the problems about people being excluded, but a lot of employers aren't even applying for it. Bonnie said that her workplace isn't eligible for JobKeeper and she just found out, so she's now applying for it a month after not having shifts. So, like, this transition, like, the schemes might be there, but actually getting onto them, like, there's gaps, and a lot of people are falling through those gaps. And one thing that you might want to respond to, Felicity, Ellie asks, is it fair for an employer to request a permanent part-time employee working to work full-time to qualify for JobKeeper, so going from 1 to 2 days to 5? Is that something that you've heard is being put on young people as a bit of pressure there?
Yeah, we've definitely heard stories of where employers are trying to increase, say, the hours of part-time workers or casual workers beyond what they were working before to, I guess, make them earn their $1,500 per fortnight. And I guess JobKeeper is good in its essence that it keeps you connected to your employer, which means that both the employee and, like, for instance, a business can bounce back quicker, but it's there to help an employer cover wages where there's been, a downturn. So it's unlikely that they're going to need you to work as many shifts, and that's part of the eligibility, that there's been a downturn in the business. So it's unlikely they're going to need you to work as many shifts as you were previously. The second thing is, if I've forgotten the name of the person who had the inquiry.
It was Ellie.
So if Ellie will have a contract as a permanent part-time worker too, she should have a look at that contract, because that'll state the number of hours that she is expected to work each week. And, they can only reasonably request that she works more on top of that. They can't unilaterally alter that contract. And, things that need to be taken into consideration are the health and safety of the workers, the reasonable aspect of how much they were working previously. So no, they can't force you to work the equivalent of what they would ordinarily do to earn the equivalent of 1,500.
And yeah, Ellie, we actually asked that, if you're still watching, Ellie, we asked that question during the debate and said, are you going to be able to use this to force people who are part-time, who might have other responsibilities, might have caring responsibilities or other things that just mean that they're not in a position to work full-time? Can you use this to force people's hours up? And we got told the answer was no. So, Ellie, if you're not, if you're in Victoria, you might want to contact the Young Workers Centre, and if you're not, it's probably a good time now to go and join a union and find out, make sure you join your union to find out what your rights are, because this is, as we're hearing, a time where a lot of unscrupulous employers are using it to, so a lot of people are doing the right thing, but some are using it to take advantage of people and put people under huge amounts of pressure. So we're hearing some pretty scary, Felicity, projections about unemployment rates, and some stats just came out that said that 1 in 10 young people have already lost their job, and that's and it's potentially going to get worse. What's this going to mean, and what's it going to mean for people's future?
Yeah, you're exactly right. There's been some scary figures out there around youth unemployment. I think a conservative estimate of youth unemployment would be that to expect it to hit 30%. A Grattan Institute report was released last week. They said that more than 40% of workers aged 15 to 19 will be out of work, and about 30% of workers in their 20s. And I guess one of the reasons is that so many workers, young workers, are in sectors which have been hit the hardest by social distancing and forced shutdowns. So, they are more likely to be out of work at the moment. And 3 of the 6 industries that have slashed hours the most due to the COVID-19 pandemic are hospitality, retail, and arts and recreation. And they collectively employ 45% of young people, compared to 27% of all other ages. And
can you say that again? Like, that's astounding. Can you say that again?
Yeah, so the industries which have obviously been impacted the most had to close down. Arts and entertainment, for instance, were the first sort of industry to be impacted, and they collectively, those 3 industries which have been hit the most, collectively employ 45% of young people. And so you can see how these youth unemployment figures are going to reach the heights that are being talked about. And I guess the thing is as well that those are also the industries which are probably going to have restrictions lifted last on them, and rightly so, but it does mean that it's not going to change anytime soon. Those workers, young workers, are going to be out of work for the foreseeable future. And I think at that point it's also worth noting that that's going to have impacts beyond just youth unemployment and, you know, money in the bank account. And the dignity of work is also so important, and it has impacts on youth mental health as well, mental health for all workers. So it does have so many, unemployment does have so many impacts.
And what do you think? What do you think, Bella? Is sort of potential medium and long-term impacts of this?
Yeah, I think Felicity's really hit the nail on the head talking about just, how sky high the unemployment rate will be and what that will sort of do to really devastate a generation that's already sort of grown up facing a bunch of different crises. Like, we're talking about people who are aged, 15 to 25. Lots of them, wouldn't have been directly affected by the last global financial crash. We kind of came out of it relatively okay. But it's for people who, for the next sort of decade of their life, might not have any stable work, might not have any work at all. And particularly with this government's track record of how they treat people who are on any kind of social support, any disability payment, any welfare payment, it's an incredibly punitive system that can destroy people's lives. And if we're seeing an entire generation go through that, it could, really, really change things, as well as sort of seeing climate impacts and a bunch of other things topple on top of each other. I guess myself and a bunch of other young people, are sort of hopeful that this also might be the precipice of a lot of young people deciding that it's time to stand up for their rights as a generation. And we can see particularly already a lot of young people sort of realising that perhaps a lot of the inequalities in Australia that were a bit masked to them before this are really sort of laid bare at the moment.
Yeah, it's and if you look back at, you mentioned some previous crises, like during the GFC, one of the things that happened was that, a lot of people lost their job, and we avoided a recession, but a lot of people lost their job. But young people were hit harder, and like the graph for unemployment went up, but the graph for young people went up much more. And one of the things that's happened in Australia since then is that although it came back for everyone else after the GFC, for young people, it never really did. And there's been even going into this crisis, as we talked about at the start, there was young people really got smashed by the last big downturn that we had, and now getting this as well as the climate crisis. It's as you said, it's not only feeling the pressure but feeling the anger, right? I mean, this is how much can people bear?
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think the other thing as well is not just unemployment but underemployment as well. And ultimately, as we come out of this pandemic, it's going to take some time for the economy to recover. And the reality is that for young people, there'll be less work there. They might have a job, but they might have less hours or shifts per week. And they were already underemployed in so many cases already. About 18.2% of young workers were looking for more work or more hours, even though they had a job. And that's not going to disappear either.
Yeah, and we should talk in a moment about sort of what we're going to have to tidy up in the future to change to stop this from happening, because that underemployment, another way of thinking about that is kind of crappy jobs or low hour jobs, where it's it might be gig work, it might be a shift here or a shift there, or it might be the employer just saying, well, I'll only guarantee you 2 or 3 hours a week, and then you just got to be on call, right, to come in the next day or the next hour to work an extra couple. And so you never quite get the security that everyone deserves, and you end up never quite getting the level of income that the people deserve. But the way that employment statistics are counted is if you work for an hour a week, you get counted as employed. And so I think it's a really good point to say it's not just about unemployment, it's about underemployment, and that point that I think Bella raised before about meaningful work, because a lot of these jobs just aren't meaningful, and they're not really fulfilling, and they don't even bring in a wage now. And so, again, people must feel sort of a bit at breaking point. And I just want to say, though, on a really positive note, Melissa has said that how great it is to see such smart, brave young women fighting for the rights of many. So, and I think that's one of the things that you probably both hope that we get out of this year, a sense that we're all in this together, but also it's time for people to come together and stand up.
Yeah, I agree. There's not just the two of us. There's so many young people who are taking action. And like I was talking about the JobKeeper wage subsidy before, that's just one example of, young people campaigning, standing up for their rights and, demanding, better future as well. This is now more than ever, it's such a good opportunity for young people to take action and, come together as a collective and to kind of reimagine and rebuild our future, I guess.
And I just want to throw, let's talk in a moment about where we go next and where you think, what you think we need to do and young people need to do. I just want to put a couple of comments that have come through, and if you're watching and you want to pop a comment either on Facebook or on YouTube, please do. I'll just read out 3 of the comments and invite you both to respond to any or all of them. Simone said, my son's employer asked my son to pay back $3,000 out of his JobKeeper payment yesterday and do 20 hours a week from a casual job of 3 hours a week. So that's from Simone. Jessie has said people who receive disability support pension and are under 21 are receiving the same amount as the old rate of New Start with no increase in payment. So they didn't get any. These are people who might be on the JobSeeker payment or on some form of social security that New Start is being referred to there. People on disability support pension haven't got an increase at all. And Nathan's asked, what do you think about this idea of dipping into your super? So any or all of those, I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, and I was actually thinking about super earlier in the day. So obviously the government announced a little while ago that you're able to dip into your superannuation and, to get you through this tricky time. But young people are going to be overwhelmingly impacted, by that for decades to come. And last week the government announced that 456,000 people have, applied to dip into their super and have had those applications approved. That totals $3.8 billion. Like, that's a lot of money to think about. And I know superannuation is not always front of mind for a lot of young people, but it means that on average, people are applying to withdraw $8,000. And it's really devastating, I guess, to see that so many workers have been left with no option other to dip into their superannuation to pay rent or put food on the table or whatever it is bills they have to pay this week. And I guess it's young people who will be overwhelmingly impacted. If you're 25 now and you take out $10,000, you could lose anywhere up to around 200,000, say, of interest between now and when you retire. So again, it's not just the short term or the medium term impacts, it's the long term impacts too will be big.
Yeah, and I think just on that and with the super as well, the interesting kind of similarity there in all of those comments is like one of the kind of unseen devastating impacts of the mass unemployment of young people that we'll see and the measures that we're seeing at the moment, as well as the material loss. It's also this attempt to kind of create this idea that there isn't enough for everyone and there's like a scarcity model among young people. And so what the government's done in this coronavirus response is they've first preferenced businesses and said the utmost priority during a health crisis is to keep our economy going and to keep businesses going. But then they've also created a divide between working and non-working people and said that, people who otherwise had jobs deserve to be able to pay their rent and have food and live, but people who are already struggling on the disability support pension can somehow still manage on like $40 a day, and creating more divides between ordinary people who would otherwise be fighting for the same solutions. And similarly with dipping into your super, like I don't think I have much super. I worked in hospitality and I think I didn't get paid super in almost half of the jobs over the 8 years. They're measures that don't apply to people, and it's a way of making sure that, there are significant barriers to people who have already been disadvantaged before this time. And they're making sure that it's business, first of all, that stays off, where workers and non-working people will be devastated for generations to come.
So there's a lot of people who've been left behind, and there's a lot of people that we've got to fight to not only be included in the responses of the government, but the government talks about potentially being able to snap back, talks about being able to go back to normal. It seems to me that kind of what we've also actually got to do is fight for a better normal, right? Because a lot of these problems pre-existed and they've been exacerbated by the crisis. But unless we fight for things to get better, then then we're potentially going to see sort of some really long-term impacts that you've been talking about. And just for people who are watching, who Bella and Felicity aren't here talking as Greens people. Yes, we're hosting this, but this is to talk about they're both in organisations that are fighting for the rights of young people and fighting for a better future. So, can I silver lining isn't quite the right word, but also it's worth remembering that some weird things have happened over the last few weeks as well. Like we've for some people, not for all, as we've been talking about, but for some people, we've effectively doubled Newstart, and which is, I think, an admission from the government that it was never good enough to begin with. And so it had to be doubled because all of a sudden a lot of people were going to realise that it actually requires you to live below the poverty line. We've got the government saying, yeah, it's one of the things government can do is step in and protect human life and then actually find ways of looking after people along the way. And, we've got free childcare now as well. And there's, I think, I love to know what you think about what's our way out of this. Yeah, the government's already said the answer is to start attacking people's rights, and we've got to cut company taxes, and that kind of more of the same is our pathway out of it. But, maybe there's a different pathway that involves keeping free childcare and higher unemployment benefits and higher wages for everyone as well. What do you think is our way out of this?
I think it's such a good point, Adam, that there's that horrible word crisis opportunity, where it's a crisis and an opportunity at the same time. But I think
Simpsons reference, love it. Great, thank you.
That in a matter of weeks, things that we thought would previously be impossible from a coalition government were delivered easily and within days, including the doubling of JobSeeker. And I think, it gives us a moment to try and set how we recover from this. And I think, the government and, big business lobby groups have a clear need and want to snap back into the way things were. And I think young people also have an opportunity to say this is actually a point where we can't turn back and that we can create a better future. But I think the interesting thing is that we do have a generation of young people coming up, if you look at sort of the school strikers and school leavers and people into their early 20s who don't really remember, work choices. They don't really remember the Howard years. They don't have a sense of sort of what it looked like when workers' rights were under attack, but they do know what they're experiencing now and they do know what they want instead. And so I think we have this generation of people who have the imagination to actually imagine a world that is far better, and the chance to start implementing it. I think what we've seen with the government is so interesting, that their response of the sort of quote unquote good things we have been given is just enough to make sure that we can sort of keep functioning and keep coming back to an economy. But it wasn't the power of ordinary people that implemented those changes in the first place. So we have to sort of really take a long, serious look at ourselves and say, how do we as a generation and as a group of ordinary people who want a better future work to make sure that the power to make decisions about how we live and make decisions about how our society and economy operate is actually in the hands of ordinary people, and to make sure that coming out of this, we put ourselves in places where ordinary people have the right and the responsibility to make the decisions about how to govern their lives, and govern their communities as well. So it does feel like we're at a very interesting point.
Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I entirely agree with Bella. We've talked a lot about, how bad things are and this evening, and how things are really tricky for young people. But really now is, I guess, the time to think big, think bold, and we will need systematic change to address these threats that we face. And now is the time, for young people to reimagine and rebuild the future. And it's really good opportunity, and never been a better time to kind of think about what that systematic change and what demands we have, and to kind of come out the other side of this and build a future that is a fairer and just future, I guess.
One of the things that I think it'd be good to put on the table coming out of all of this is, as well as saying, well, we clearly need higher youth allowance and Newstart or JobSeeker coming out of this, and we clearly need things like free childcare. I think too there's potentially a chance to say, well, going into it, people weren't set up very well, and one of the reasons for that was because so many people are in insecure work and everything has been so insecure, and especially for young people for a while. So perhaps we need to start changing the laws to make work a bit more secure and give people some more rights at work to be able to say, well, no, look, you might, just because it works for you to put me on a contract for an hour here and an hour there, it doesn't work for me, and start to change the laws to put in some minimum standards to tilt the balance back a bit so that people aren't sort of worried all the time about making ends meet.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's very clear, if it wasn't before, it definitely is now, that we need, jobs that we can count on, but a living wage, for all. So we need, good, clean, secure jobs. And, this flexibility around casual work or insecure work is clearly not all that it was cracked up to be. And so, conversions from casual work to either part-time or full-time work. But like you said, JobSeeker has clearly been increased for a reason. It clearly wasn't enough for those who are unemployed right now to live on. Why was it, not increased previously? Why was it, not enough for those who were unemployed in February or January to live on? And that's going to be the case in 6 months' time when the government are proposing to reduce the rate of JobSeeker or New Start, whatever you want to call it, and still going to be the same then. So, I think you're definitely right. JobSeeker shouldn't be reduced, and it questions as well, like, what is a living wage? What should our minimum wage be as well? There's so many things that we need to be thinking about right now.
And maybe, coming out of all of this, it might be time to have rent control as well, and to say that and to build some more public housing and some more social housing, so that there's not, everyone isn't competing for a few houses and pushing the rent up, but that we actually have a roof over everyone's heads. Lots of things that we can fight for. And I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening on the various channels. It's been really great to hear from you, and but I especially want to thank you both, Felicity and Bella, for joining us and for talking to everyone. I want to invite, we're going to finish up now, but please keep the comments coming in, and the like your stories. Hearing your stories is incredibly powerful, because it allows each of us to go and then take what you're telling us to go and fight in Parliament and with the employers and on the streets to say, here's the kind of change we need, and we're not just making it up, we're actually doing it because of the very powerful stories that you've been telling us. But before we go, I'll just ask each of you to give us a pitch and a reminder to everyone about your organisations and what you do. And you're talking now to people that are probably feeling like, a lot of people are doing it a bit tough right now, but I think we're also getting a sense that people are feeling a bit optimistic and looking about where we might go next. So hand it over to you to tell people why they should, what you do, what you've been doing, and why they should get involved with you.
Great. So I'm obviously Felicity from the Young Workers Centre. Our kind of purpose and goal is, we want a state in which young people are safe at work, they don't suffer harassment or bullying, and are provided their legal entitlements as well. But for that vision to be realised, we know that we must encourage young people to speak up without fear, and join with other young workers to make change and improve their workplaces and their communities too. Now's never been a better time to join together with your workmates and reach out to the Young Workers Centre if you would like to be involved in our campaigns. But most importantly, join your union too. There's a union for every worker out there, and you can go to australianunions.org.au to work out which union represents your industry, because I think we've seen in the last few weeks that it's never been more important to be a part of your union and join together collectively to fight for your rights.
Thanks, Felicity.
And Young Workers Centre has been very helpful to a bunch of our volunteers as well, so they're pretty great. Young Campaigns, like Adam said at the start, is an organisation set up to fight for economic justice for young people. And particularly at the moment, that means that we're committed to campaigning to make sure that the rate of JobSeeker stays at the doubled rate. And we're actually going to be building towards a national mobilisation in about 6 months to say that we need to make sure that there is a public job and income guarantee for everyone, because it is just sort of common sense at this point. And there is so much work that is needed that young people are ready and willing to do to avert the climate crisis and to ensure that we can have a society where everyone is actually cared for, and that's the top priority. So we campaign for, you know, a big, brighter vision for young people. You can check us out on Facebook and Instagram and all the different places, and we're having a bunch of weekly inductions for anyone new to get involved in our rapid response campaigning and also building for a better vision of what young people can achieve.
Thanks, Bella, and thanks, Felicity. And when we're all allowed to gather together again, I look forward to seeing you on the streets. And let's make sure that we keep at least some of those gains that have been achieved over the last little while. And thanks, everyone, for joining us this evening. Thanks again for all of your stories. If you haven't had your queries answered, you've got a couple of great places now to go to perhaps get some answers about your rights and to make sure that your rights are being protected, especially in this really difficult time. And know that we'll keep fighting for you in Parliament as well. That's what we see as our job during this difficult time, is to make sure that no one is left behind. So thanks, everyone, for joining us. Thanks again, Bella. Thanks, Felicity. Bye.